Hello and welcome to this Islam Channel special on a man who became a victim of the West War on Terror and is now trapped in a legal black hole that has left him jailed without trial for over 7 years. His name is Babar Ahmad. It is a case of absent justice. Well, thanks for joining us. I'm Phil Rees. Babar Ahmad has been fighting a lengthy legal battle to prevent his extradition to the United States, where the authorities accuse him of raising money to support Al-Qaeda and the Taliban in Afghanistan in the late 1990s. This week, the controversial law that is at the center of Babar Ahmad's case, the Extradition Act 2003, was surprisingly backed by an independent review. We'll be discussing that crucial law, which gives the government powers to hold Babar Ahmad without trial, in a few minutes. Meanwhile, his family, friends and supporters have launched a petition calling for British justice for British citizens. Thousands have already signed, but over 100,000 online signatures are needed before November 10th. This is the number, 100,000, under the government's e-petition website scheme, which will then force Parliament to discuss Babar Ahmad's case. Well, we'll be speaking to members of the Free Babar Ahmad campaign in the second part of the show. But first, let's remind ourselves about Babar Ahmad and absent justice. Here's Nina Arif.
Babar Ahmad was first arrested here at his South London home in December 2003. Following a pre-dawn raid by anti-terrorist police officers, he was taken to Charing Cross Police Station. He had sustained 74 injuries during the arrest by officers from the Metropolitan Police's controversial Territorial Support Group, the same group at the root of accusations of police brutality dating back from the death of protester Blair Peach in 1979 to Ian Tomlinson in 2009. Babar Ahmad was initially arrested because of accusations that he had provided material support to terrorists. But he was never charged with anything, and after 6 days he was released from police custody. But then, in August 2004, Ahmad was re-arrested because of an extradition warrant from the US. They accused him of running online fundraising operations for jihadists in Chechnya and Afghanistan. But under the controversial US-UK extradition treaty, no evidence is required to justify the extradition. Babar Ahmad was subsequently taken to a high-security prison where he has remained ever since, fighting extradition to the US. In March 2009, Babar Ahmad was awarded £60,000 in compensation after an admission by the UK's anti-terrorist police that they had mistreated him during his initial arrest in 2003. In the words of the Metropolitan Police Commissioner of the time, Ahmad had been the victim of a serious, gratuitous and prolonged attack. Despite the fact that Babar Ahmad received £60,000 in compensation, the 4 officers accused of attacking him were cleared by Scotland Yard of any wrongdoing. The jury at the trial was not told about the successful suing of the police by Babar Ahmad, or that one of the officers involved was already linked to a string of complaints of abuse, including the racial abuse of a teenager. Ahmad says that till this day he hasn't even been questioned about the allegations against him, nor has he been shown any evidence. He and his family do not believe that he will receive a fair trial in the US and say that since his alleged crimes were committed in the UK, he should face trial here.
Nina Arif with that report. Well, to unpick the legal complexities of the case, I'm joined by Asim Qureshi, a human rights lawyer from Cage Prisoners, and also from Cage Prisoners, the former Guantanamo detainee, Muazzam Beg. Well, I mean, if I could start with you, actually, Muazzam, I mean, it's very peculiar, isn't it, what happened in this case, in the sense that he was arrested, then released, then arrested again. I mean, what was going on then?
What's something that I remember very, very clearly, it was in my solitary confinement cell in Guantanamo in 2003. I was interrogated once by some American intelligence agents and some British guys who came along and presented the name of Babar Ahmad and said, "Do you know who this guy is? What do you know of him? And have you ever come across him?" And I didn't know who he was at the time, but nonetheless it was evident to me that they were sending out teams of interrogators, either by proxy or directly, around the world to torture sites to extract information which would then be used in evidently a secret, or rather at least evidence that Babar never gets to see, in order to build a case against him. Clearly, you can hear from the allegation, you can see from the allegations that he was supporting the Chechens and so forth. That's not an issue. The issue was the allegation that he was supporting Taliban at a time when Britain and America in particular had declared a war against Afghanistan and so forth. And it seems that they had no qualms about where they would get this information from, who they would pressurize for getting it, and whether torture was involved or not. And so I'm one of the ones who strongly believe that torture evidence was used in order to obtain information which would then later be used.
Well, that's
to justify
remarkable. Certainly he was described as a highly trained terrorist, someone with a shrapnel wound from fighting overseas, a man who was a real danger. You're telling me that it's most likely that this information came from people in somewhere, Guantanamo or elsewhere, some of these secret...
Absolutely. I have no doubt in my mind about that. Knowing the way in which the British intelligence services have operated in my case, I know, for example, that British police came to my house based upon information directly of the time when I was being tortured in Bagram, where people were beaten to death. These are the types of places where information, I believe, was used partly for people like Babar Ahmad and others. You can see also that the nature, the way in which they dealt with him after the first arrest, in which they beat him up, it was clear that he wasn't this highly trained, vicious fighter. He didn't put up a resistance. Rather, what they did to him, and this, for me, encapsulates the whole vision of the war on terror, is when they forced him onto the ground into a bowing position and said, "Where is your God now?" Mm. And that, to me,
we want to come to that later, actually, because obviously the whole question of its, how significant this is to Muslims in Britain, so let's not go quite into that next. I want to stick with maybe the kind of details of this arrest and the violence and all that. So, if I could turn to you, Asim Qureshi, he was picked up. Well, there was not enough evidence to press charges. Is that what happened?
That's exactly correct. We have to look at what the allegations are here. The allegations are that Babar Ahmad committed an offence here in the UK. Okay, he's never been to America. Okay, so when the British police initially arrested him, they arrested him because they alleged or they suspected that he had some kind of involvement with Material Support for Terrorism or something along those lines. And yet he was released without any charges because they realized very quickly that they had no case to bring against him.
But they had seen the same websites that the American prosecutors later watched. It was the same...
Once again, it's exactly the same information, with the exception maybe of anything secret, as Muslims suggested, that might have been received from overseas. But, as far as we're aware, okay, that really it's exactly the same allegations that were here in the UK.
Okay. And what were exactly those allegations? What was the content of the website?
Once again, the allegations relate to material support for the Taliban and for Mujahideen in Chechnya.
Yeah, you see, I think this issue is, if you look at the jurisdictional issue, is that the website purportedly was hosted in many countries all around the world, and for a short amount of time, I think it was just for a few months, it was hosted in the United States. So the United States have taken upon itself, and none of these other countries have done so, but the United States took it upon itself to say that because the jurisdiction is ours for just a couple of months, therefore the whole thing is ours.
So, but let's just be clear though, that what was on the websites, the British government, even at this time, the heightened period after 9/11, even the content of that was not deemed to have broken a British law. But because that website was temporarily hosted in, I believe it was Connecticut, then that was deemed to be enough for the United States to issue a warrant. Is that fair?
That's correct.
That's the case. That's the whole bones of the case, is that none of these other countries, including the United Kingdom, who were key allies of the United States in the war on terror, ever thought that a crime had been committed.
Okay, but Asim Qureshi, let's try and go down to this. For example, the Connecticut U.S. attorney said, if you're supporting the Taliban and the Taliban is killing American soldiers, we're alleging you're conspiring to kill American citizens abroad. Well, there is a logic there.
I mean, it's very, very stretched logic. I mean, the fact is that, look, forget about the allegations. What we're looking at, okay, and what the main thing we're concerned about, where did any alleged offence take place, okay? The fact is that, is America claiming universal jurisdiction over every single human being anywhere on the earth who disagrees with American foreign policy? Because that's what effectively they're saying. Okay, so, you know, the fact that, you know, maybe I comment on Facebook, for example, that, you know, America's doing really terrible things. Okay, is that now seen as asymmetric warfare against the US because Facebook servers are based in the US as well? I mean, it's quite crazy when you start thinking about it, how far they could potentially take this, how far this precedent could actually go. And that's why what we're looking at here is the principle of Babar Ahmad's case. Forget about the allegations. The allegations actually, okay, are the thing that we should be least concerned with in terms of
But I mean, they're
the
paper
fact that
thin in terms of, I mean, actually doing anything from my understanding, aren't they? I mean, the first place,
I mean,
right?
if he had committed a crime, he would have been convicted here in the UK. I mean, we say that straight off the bat, okay? But the fact is that there is a deeper principle here, and that is one that relates to justice. And that is what we are here to talk about today, and what we're effectively campaigning for, that we want to bring the focus back on what is the principle here. And the principle here is that a man should not be taken to a foreign forum or a foreign jurisdiction to face trial for something that he is alleged to have committed in his home country. At the very least, there should be a prima facie case first, which there hasn't been.
Okay, we want to discuss the whole question of extradition in a minute, because it's complicated. It's indeed at the heart of all of this, and there's been even developments of that this week. But before we go on to that, I want to talk about what happened during the arrest and the whole saga with the police officers. That again has been highly confusing. Asim Qureshi, I mean, clearly he was beaten up. We've seen the pictures. His arrest was a very, very violent endeavour. I mean, he's received money, yet the police officers weren't charged. Does that make sense?
I attended some of the jury trial of the police officers, and the fact is that the jury was not given the full information. They didn't know about the fact that Babar Ahmad received compensation from the police, with an admit that mistakes were made and that effectively that he had been abused during that raid. They weren't privy to that information, which I think would have been crucial. And I think in the climate...
Why weren't they by any...
Sorry?
Why weren't they privy to that information?
The judge claimed that it would prejudice the case.
The decision.
That's what he claimed. Whereas, you know, we would say actually it would help the jury to actually understand, well, if the police themselves have recognised that an offence was committed, then surely the jury should be privy to that information, because it speaks to the actual incident itself and the way that the police handled the matter. So, I mean, Babar received £60,000, which for a police brutality case is a huge payout. Okay, you don't get payouts that big from the police for alleged abuse cases, and so that in itself is actually a very, very, very strong indication of the culpability that the police felt that they had. Now, in the kind of climate that we live in, where a man comes before a jury and the individual is maligned excessively in the worst possible ways, you know, with claims of terrorism and whatever, and this entire scenario set up to make the police look like they're almost victims, then of course, you know, with any human beings, they're going to be, you know, somewhat swayed by that. And I feel that the jury was swayed extremely heavily towards finding the police officers innocent, or not guilty at least anyway. And
but why though? Because it was alleged basically that Babar fought back, is it? I mean, that was their defence, that he didn't come quietly, basically.
I think it was less than that. I think it was the fact that the jury felt that the police had used appropriate force in light of the environment that currently existed.
Well, but he was, I mean, bloodied and bruised. I mean, those pictures are in the public domain. I mean...
Well, some people think that kind of force is reasonable. And that's the big problem that we face today, that the way that Muslims have been maligned effectively allows for people to accept such abuse and such, you know, torture in their name.